Joining me now, Democratic strategist and former advisor to the Obama campaign, Amisha Cross, and Brendan Buck, MSNBC political analyst and former press secretary to House Speaker John Boehner. Welcome you two. Amisha, Theriault said he wasn't asking for violent retribution, but does that threat remain when you have these leaders calling for revenge? I mean, one follower could interpret it to mean violence. Is Donald Trump prepared for that?
I think Donald Trump is prepared for it. I also think that there's something sinister behind it. One thing that we know about criminality is that those that have committed violent crimes are likely to commit violent crimes again. That's one of the reasons why we try to keep violent criminals detained. But in addition to that, set parameters around them when they are released. With that being said, this is a guy who knows that words have power. You recall, even before January 6th, the Proud Boys were issuing all types of statements where they were utilizing white supremacist violence throughout communities across this country. So he definitely knows that his words have power, as does Donald Trump, who during his last time in office uplifted a lot of the words of people like the Proud Boys.
So, Brendan, the pardons took many Trump allies by surprise. Many Republicans, in fact, have struggled to respond when they're asked about it. Could this have political consequences, not only for Trump, but also lawmakers in the midterms?
Perhaps. I mean, the consequences haven't really caught up to anybody yet. Donald Trump ran on the idea of pardoning these people. But what he did run on more specifically was he was going to pardon the people who were nonviolent. And so much as his own vice president were saying that just days before the pardons. I think it's important to appreciate what Donald Trump said recently explaining that. He said that it would have been too cumbersome to go through all of the cases and figure out which ones were too violent to release. It was too cumbersome. He didn't want to take the time to think about it. Think about whether or not this person was actually a threat to further violence, or what they did was so heinous that they shouldn't be released, like injuring police officers. That's how serious or not seriously he's taken this. So, he may act like there was some greater calling what's going on here, but he sort of gave that up when he admitted he didn't even look at these things. He just said, look, if these people were for me on that day, I don't care what they did, let them all out.
Yeah, just letting that sink in for a moment. All of you watching as well. Amisha, let's move to the Trump administration having carried out these very publicized immigration raids. Over 1,100 arrests were made across Thursday and Friday. The mayor of Newark, New Jersey, reacted to an immigration raid in his city Thursday at a local business. He said U.S. citizens were detained. Listen up.
None of these people were rapists or murderers or criminals. The problem with it is that ICE went in there without a warrant. And we can disagree on politics, but what we must agree on is that the thing that separates this country from many other countries around the world is the Constitution of the United States.
So we know about 70% of those arrested Thursday and Friday had criminal records. Does it seem like Trump is keeping his pledge to go after criminals first?
No, it seems like Donald Trump used that as a PR campaign to basically relax the emotions of those who are undocumented or going through the process and have not, been completely granted citizenship yet, to feel as though they were going to be okay. What we're seeing in these raids is that they are no respecters of persons. They are going to restaurants. They are going to stores. They are going to communities that are known to have sizable Latino populations, and they are just essentially rounding people up. There was one case specifically in Newark that the mayor actually talked about where one of the people who actually encountered ICE was was one of our former servicemen. He was a veteran, someone who had documentation, someone who had his ID on him, and ICE acted as though that ID might have been fake. They do not care whether these are actual American citizens or not. And I think that as this continues to happen, we're going to see more and more people get rounded up who are legally in this country, who just happen to be of a Latino background.
Brendan, at least one deportation flight was not able to take off because Mexico denied that plane access to land. Will Trump have the resources and the cooperation of other nations, actually, to carry out the mass detentions and deportations that he's promised?
It's absolutely the right question. And I think what you're seeing early on, to Amisha's point, is a lot of activity to get people all spun up, because there are real logistical roadblocks to being able to do what he's talked about doing, mass deportations. While there have been raids here and there. I mean, there are always raids. There were raids in the Biden administration. It's not so easy to just go in and identify dangerous criminals and root them out. They also don't have anywhere to put them. This is going to, if they're actually going to do this, it's going to take a really long time, but it's also going to take a lot of resources from Congress. And it's not exactly clear that they're going to be able to get those. So I think what they're trying to do, I think to Amisha's point, is to scare everybody. Is one, scare the people who are here, maybe hope that they leave, but also scare people from coming here in the first place. Look, I think if Donald Trump kept his promise to root out criminals who are not here legally, that would be really popular, and I would be all there for that. I think they probably are thinking much bigger than that, and I think they're just going to be building to it. So it's going to be a story that's with us for a long time. It's just easier said than done at first.
I'm going to ask this last question to both of you and ask for your answers in a few words. Brendan, you first, with Jonathan Allen describing Trump's first week as rewarding his MAGA base and settling scores. And he said Trump's flood the zone strategy means that each move gets less scrutiny than it would under a less activist president. Is he hoping that this avalanche makes it harder to push back against specific actions? And do you think it's working?
Absolutely. And it's been a calling card of his forever. It's hard to keep track of whatever he's doing because he'll outrage you with something else the next day. There's a list of things we could talk about he did in the first week that we don't have time to get into. Right. I don't think that's going to slow down anytime soon.
Okay. Last word to you quickly, Amisha.
No, I think that's absolutely true. This is Donald Trump's MO. He likes to open the floodgates, and that's what he's doing. He is not only eradicating a lot of the policies from the Biden administration. He's also going all the way back to Lyndon Baines Johnson. He's hitting you with the unraveling of civil rights, re-envisioning the Department of Justice. These are things that took decades to put into place, and he is essentially watering them down and erasing them within a matter of days.
It's pretty stunning. Amisha Cross, Brendan Buck, good to see you both as always. Thanks, guys.